Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a landmark case that fundamentally reshaped the balance of power in India. It's the story of how the Supreme Court drew a constitutional line in the sand, protecting state governments from the whims of the central government.
So let me ask you this. Imagine the government you voted for in your state is just dismissed, overnight, by the folks in power at the center. It sounds pretty extreme, right? Well, for a long time, it was a political reality in India. And that brings us to the core question of our explainer today. Can a state's elected government really be fired overnight?
All right, let's set the scene. Our story kicks off in the state of Karnataka, way back in 1989. The chief minister at the time was a man named S.R.Bommai, and his government was about to walk right into a crisis that would shake the very foundations of Indian democracy.
So here's the play-by-play. S.R.Bommai is running the government when all of a sudden rumors start flying that he's lost his majority support in the assembly. Now, in a democracy, there's a pretty clear way to settle this. You hold a vote on the floor of the House. It's called the floor test. But, and this is the crucial part, that step was completely skipped. Instead, the governor just decided, based on his own assessment, to recommend dismissing the government. The president in Delhi agreed, and boom. Just like that, an entire elected state assembly was dissolved.
So you're probably wondering, how is that even possible? What kind of constitutional tool lets the central government just fire an elected state government? Well, the power comes from one single and very controversial part of the Indian Constitution, Article 356.
So Article 356, which you'll often hear called President's Rule, is this incredibly powerful emergency provision. It was designed for the most extreme situations, like a total collapse of law and order, a situation where the state government just can't function anymore. When it's used, the central government basically hits pause on the elected state government and takes direct control.
And here's the massive gap between the idea and the reality. Its intended purpose was to be a constitutional safety net for very rare emergencies. But its actual use, for decades, was often as a political weapon. The party in power at the center would use it to topple state governments run by their rivals. And this constant misuse is exactly what brought the whole issue to the Supreme Court.
Now, S.R.Bommai didn't just go home and accept his dismissal. No way. He challenged it. And his case, along with a few other similar ones, worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. The court was now faced with a massive task. It had to answer 4 fundamental questions about power, democracy, and the very structure of India. First up, was this power absolute? Could the president, acting on the advice of the central government, just dismiss a state government without anyone being able to question the reasons why? Was it a power with absolutely no checks and balances?
And that leads directly to question number 2. Could the judiciary even get involved? Or was this a purely political decision, something totally outside the court's lane? I mean, the Supreme Court's whole role as the guardian of the Constitution was really on the line here.
The third question really zeroed in on the governor's role. Was the governor's personal opinion that a government had lost its majority? Was that enough? Could a subjective assessment made in an office instead of a legislature be the final, unchallengeable word on the matter? And finally, the fourth big question. After you dismiss a government, what about the assembly itself, the actual elected representatives? Does it have to be dissolved right away, making the whole thing irreversible? Or was there another way to handle it?
Then, in 1994, a full 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. And let me tell you, this wasn't just another ruling. It was a constitutional earthquake. It completely rewrote the rules of the game between the central government and the states.
The court laid down 5 crystal-clear rules. First, yes, the courts can review a decision to impose president's rule. They can check if the power was used for shady reasons. Second, and this is the big one, a government's majority must be tested on the floor of the assembly, and nowhere else. The floor test is now mandatory. Third, Article 356 is for exceptional cases only, not for political games. Fourth, the assembly isn't dissolved right away. It's just suspended until Parliament approves the move. And finally, get this, if a court finds a dismissal was unconstitutional, it can actually bring the old government back to power.
So if you take away just one thing from this whole verdict, let it be this. The floor of the Legislative Assembly, that is the only place where a majority can be tested.
It's not about the private opinion or personal satisfaction of a governor. It's about a public, transparent, democratic process. This one principle yanked the power out of a single person's office and put it back where it belongs, with the people's elected representatives.
And the judgment didn't stop there. It also used this opportunity to reinforce another core principle of India. The court declared that secularism is a part of the basic structure of the constitution, meaning it's a non-negotiable feature. And it said that if a state government acts against this secular ideal, that could be a valid reason for dismissal, linking this emergency power to a fundamental national value.
Okay, so a bunch of legal stuff changed, but what was the real-world impact? Why does this case from decades ago still matter so much to us today? Well, its legacy is absolutely enormous.
Just look at this table. It shows the night and day transformation. Before this case, the courts mostly stayed out of it. After, judicial review was clearly established. The governor's power, it went from being subjective and final to being checked by a mandatory floor test. The assembly, instead of being dissolved immediately, it was just suspended. The bottom line is that state autonomy, which was once incredibly weak and vulnerable, was now constitutionally protected and massively strengthened.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? The S.R.Bommai case was the moment the judiciary built a constitutional cage around what had become a dangerous political weapon. It protected democracy, it protected federalism, it transformed Article 356 from a tool of political convenience back into the controlled, accountable emergency power it was always supposed to be.